Hey everybody, welcome back to Avalon, episode 14. Today's episode is going to be very different from anything we've done in the past so far with this project. We're not going to focus on adding props or really adding a whole lot of details in certain areas. This episode is fully dedicated to flushing out the area immediately south of that main highway with the blue lights that we added last episode, and the diagonal highway that comes off of the interchange that we detailed 2 episodes ago. So this little wedge is kind of in a key area because it is a part of the skyline, so we want to make sure that we're really defining the sort of fall off of the skyline. So we're creating sort of like a ramp up to the tallest building that we built in the 9th episode, I guess. So the skyline here is very important. What's not very important is the ground detailing, because we're going to have, well, we already have lots of tall buildings on the other side of this area, and we're going to have some very detailed residential zones just off on the other side, right up against this diagonal road here. So really this whole wedge between these two areas is mostly going to be visible as a skyline, and you're hardly going to see the roads themselves. So it's a good opportunity to really focus on the buildings and kind of add some basic detailing, things like bollards and, street level detailing, but not worry too much about anything beyond that. Because again, we're going to come back and we're going to add a lot of details on the other side of this wedge here. So it's kind of hard to describe the vision that I have for this area right now, and it's going to take probably 2 more episodes or so before you really start to see this whole area look nice. It's going to look a little bit barren as we start to just kind of define the skyline itself and not worry too much about everything else, but I promise you I have something in mind to make all of this area look very nice and kind of put together whenever we're done with this. But right now, as you can see, we're really focusing on the skyscrapers and, figuring out which buildings look good and where. So you can see I literally have like roads drawn out with skyscrapers all over them. And I'm sort of just kind of plopping down different buildings that I think will look nice together and sort of tweaking it until I have a result that I think looks good. And then in a minute here, I'm going to show you sort of the final result of all the buildings being put down, and I'm going to show you just how many blocks we filled out with all of these skyscrapers. And we'll start getting into the detailing that I was talking about earlier, the very basic detailing, just to kind of shape up the whole area and prepare it for the next few episodes. So here is what we have so far. You can see that there are now 4 blocks that are filled right up against that blue highway there. We also have like a 5th block that's kind of on the bottom left over there that was sort of half done from the freight terminal episode. We've also expanded out the rail network, so you can see it comes down there on the left-hand side in sort of the middle and then down to the left. And we also have a few buildings on the other side of the highway that will almost certainly not stay there. I think that initially I put them down just as like an idea for how tall I wanted the buildings to be in that area, but I'm probably going to get rid of them as well as that road on the other side of the diagonal highway. But this is sort of the basics of what this area is going to look like. And this sort of process that we're going through is something that we're probably going to do a few more times. We're doing it right now on the south side of the city. So we're developing this sort of southern skyline. I don't want to say degradation because that sounds like a bad word, but it really is just kind of like the sloping of the skyline. So we're going to do that on all 4 sides of the main skyscraper that we built in the 9th episode. And eventually, once we have these kind of defined, skyline areas with a little bit less detailing on the streets, then we come in and we really add like some hyper detailed kind of residential zones or maybe even office space right up against these buildings, kind of on the outer rim of this this fade off, and it kind of masks a lot of the roads, and you don't really see as much of the inner parts of a city anymore. So aside from the areas like our commercial zone, and well, we have 2 different like really big commercial marketplaces that are kind of opened up and have lots of visibility from above, but these areas are going to be very dense, so there's really not a lot of sense in using too many props here. I want to make sure that we're using props in areas that are going to be very visible. So like I said, pretty basic detailing going on in this area. But right now, I'm just filling out a lot of these empty spaces and starting to kind of shape up this area a little bit. We needed to have a couple buildings here and there to, especially around this elevated metro line here, because we have kind of blocked space where we can't put down skyscrapers. So this is where lots of little office buildings come into play. And I'm particularly paying attention to areas that are very opened up. So this area here next to this little turnaround will be very visible from above once we, fill out the whole city. It's going to be still pretty open here. So areas like this will get a lot more attention and a lot more props, whereas, little side streets and back alleys will get less detail because they're not going to be visible once we fill out everything else. So anyway, this little area in particular I kind of love. Not only is it going to be visible from above, but it'll also be visible when you're riding on the metro. And because I want to make some metro episodes where we just kind of, go around and through all of our metro lines, maybe some, Avalon transit episode or something. I want to make sure that the entire ride feels like you can just see detail in the entire city everywhere you go. So, you got some pipes kind of crossing over top of this railway, connecting these two buildings together. And, things like this will be pretty common throughout this whole line throughout the city. So even though we're adding some details right now, like I said, this is very much so like a setup episode for the next episode where we're going to really add in some detailed residential zones. But one more thing that I do want to mention about the buildings that we're adding in right now. I did mention this last episode or maybe 2 episodes ago, but we will have the painter mod in place by the time, well, it might be a few more episodes. These are obviously pre-recorded to an extent. I can't record these all live as I go, so at the time of recording this, I didn't have the painter mod, and that meant that I couldn't actually change the colors of the buildings, but I will go back and change the color of a lot of these skyscrapers so that they all kind of fit the same theme. And even though it kind of looks like a bit of a mishmash of different building styles and colors, you'll be amazed at how much better it looks once we adjust the colors of different skyscrapers. We make everything look like it's one cohesive part of the city. So keep that in mind. We will do that at some point, and this is not by any means the final result of this area once we're done with this whole thing. Part of the basic detailing that I wanted to do is adding some of these joint segment dividers just to sort of give the concrete some texture, because again, it's very basic, and a lot of these areas that are very open, I just wanted to add some basic things like these planters here with little park benches, and of course the concrete segment joints, things like that just sort of make the areas look nice that are very open, because this spot in particular is really just, you can see it's very exposed from above, so some details are nice there. I also worked a little bit on some of these back alleys that are closer to other more detailed areas. So I think this one is coming right up on our freight terminal area, and I imagine that a lot of these big square office buildings are almost certainly associated somehow with the freight terminal, or they're built there intentionally because they need to have lots of shipping in and out. So I'm trying to develop a lot of these back alleys to feel as if they are a part of some industrial complex. There's some sort of, freight pickup drop-off sort of area, loading and unloading zones around the buildings in the back alleys. So that's what that's all about. Also coming back and sort of just jumping around as I find new props to use in these areas, and, adding them accordingly. I always love to add these little, the lights with the cones, I think, in the loading areas are sort of nice. I'm also going to add a lot of lighting in these areas. Lighting is a really cheap, and when I say cheap, I mean it's, not very prop intensive way to detail an area really effectively, especially at nighttime. So you'll notice that even in areas where we're not using as many props, I'm going to use a lot of lights so that the area still looks nice at nighttime. Now, moving forward here, we're getting kind of close to the areas that we're going to work on next episode. I have a lot of plans for these, again, that I'm going to share with you next episode when we get into more of our residential districts, but I'm kind of leaving a lot of these areas open-ended. You can see that in that plaza back there, I literally just kind of like left the concrete where it was and didn't really touch it that much, but I'm keeping it kind of simple and kind of clean in these areas, especially around these office buildings where I would imagine it's just kind of like simple, not a lot of like I want to say like pedestrian amenities. I don't think that's at all what I'm really trying to say, but there's not a lot of like like food trucks and benches and park kind of things on the streets around here, because really it's just made for business. We've got all these companies, and I'd imagine you're just driving to work, and there's not really a lot of city life in these areas is really what I'm going for. So that's the main sort of reason why a lot of these areas are looking pretty clean cut and not really with all of these extra parks and whatnot. Now, moving on to this corner, this is the only residential corner that we're going to touch today. We're not going to do anything else up against this road. This is sort of like a, I don't want to say like prototype because we've done something like this before, but I wanted to play around with having very densely packed residential buildings, and I also wanted to define where all of the elevated metro lines are going to go all the way up to the diagonal road. This is very important because next episode we're going to focus a lot on the super dense residential buildings, and we need to know ahead of time where all the metro lines are going to go so we can plan out having stations. We can plan out, you know, where the actual line itself is going to cut into the buildings. So this is where these buildings come into play. I also have to add these little side roads. You can see it's going inside the buildings there, and I added a little gate looking thing as if it's like an entrance to a parking garage or something. This is important so that we can actually have access to these buildings that are sitting in the center. They don't have road access if you just set them in the middle. They're not close enough to all the avenues or that diagonal road to actually get road access. So we did need to have a diagonal road sitting in there to sort of, you know, make sure we could have services accessing these buildings. The other big challenge with some of these buildings is some of them, for some reason, they have, I don't know why people still do this, but they have like parking facilities like outside the building, or they have, you know, little trees and things, and really it's just the parking lots that drive me insane. Like having the parking outside the building is just silly in giant buildings like this. Like there's not going to be street parking right up against it. It's probably going to be either literal street parking where you park on the side of the road, or there's a parking garage. So a few of these buildings are, well, they are guilty of this, where they have little street parking kind of like plazas out in front of them, and it makes it really, really hard to use them up against roads like this, because I'll start plopping them down, I'll like the look, and then I'll look down, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, there's a whole bunch of little hedges coming out of the sides of my buildings, and there's a bunch of, you can see them right there on the bottom of the screen. I have to try and cover them up or use different buildings. So you know, not to be picky because I love these assets, but if you are an asset creator and you're going to make buildings like this, I love it so much whenever you don't include any extra things on the outside. And I know that you can use, I think it's called like, it's not Prop It Up, and maybe it's called Prop Replacer or something like that, but there is a mod that lets you get rid of certain props from buildings, but I've had mixed results with that. I've had it like revert on itself, and then all of a sudden the props are back again, and then I have to figure out which buildings I need to go back and fix again. So I kind of just gave up on using that, and I just, you know, choose buildings that don't have props already in bad places. So it's very annoying sometimes, but in the end we got it to work out, so it's not, you know, it's not a huge deal. And again, you might have noticed back there that those buildings are very, very colorful, and it seems like they're kind of clashing in color. Again, don't worry about that. That'll be fixed in future episodes when we get the painter mod and we adjust the building colors and all that stuff. But again, kind of coming away from that residential area for the final part of this episode, I just wanted to make sure that everything along this metro line looked nice. I wanted to have lots of, you know, pipes and things connecting all these different office buildings together, because again, they're right up against that freight terminal, and I imagine that they're getting lots of shipments and that they're very industrial oriented. So this area is a lot more industrial than other parts of the city. But I do want to do a lot of stuff like this in the really dense kind of office building areas to kind of capture that feel that we're going for, this like, you know, futuristic, dystopian, you know, Blade Runner-esque type thing, where we've got all these pipes and all this industrialization going on inside the city itself. So you'll notice a lot more of that probably than other city projects people do on YouTube. But anyway, that's pretty much it for this episode 14. I hope y'all enjoyed this one. Again, I know that we kind of just brushed the surface of this whole wedged area right before our diagonal transition to the new grid. So next episode, we'll be refining everything and adding in the really, really detailed residential buildings. In fact, this next episode is probably one of my favorite episodes we've recorded in the entire series. So I'm very excited to share that one with you. I feel like this whole area just looks so much better after some expansion out kind of around it, and all the buildings that are, you know, necessary to kind of mask some of the roads and things in this inner area. So Look forward to that one next Friday on my channel. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.